Margaret stood in the dusty yard, her worn suitcase heavy in her hand. The summer sun beat down on her shoulders, and she could feel the weight of judgment even more than the heat. At 23, she'd heard the whispers her whole life about her size, about being a burden, about how no decent man would want her. Her uncle's voice still echoed in her ears from that morning. "Consider it settled, Margaret. You'll go to Thomas Bennett's farm. The man needs help, and Lord knows, you need a husband. Don't expect we'll be seeing you back here." The words stung because they were meant as punishment. Her aunt and uncle had made that clear enough. They saw her as an obligation they'd finally managed to pass along to someone else. She looked up at the simple farmhouse before her, paint peeling slightly, but sturdy. Honest. A tall man in his early 30s approached, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust. Thomas Bennett removed his work gloves and extended his hand. "Miss Margaret," he said simply. His handshake was firm but gentle. "Welcome." She searched his face for mockery, for disappointment, for the cruel amusement she'd learned to expect. Instead, she found only kind brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I know what they told you," Margaret said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "About why they sent me here, about this being an arrangement." Thomas nodded slowly, as if choosing his words with care. "I know what your uncle said to me, too, but here's what I think, Miss Margaret. The way I see it, you've come a long way on a hot day, and you're probably tired and thirsty. Let's start there." He led her into the house, and Margaret noticed something unexpected. The place was clean, organized, but clearly the home of a man who'd been living alone. Not poor, as she'd been told. In fact, the furniture was well made, the pantry well stocked, over sweet tea in the simple kitchen. Thomas spoke in his measured way. "I'm going to be straight with you, Margaret." "Can I call you Margaret?" She nodded, something about his directness putting her at ease. "Your uncle led you to believe I'm a poor farmer barely scraping by. He led me to believe you were eager to leave town and needed a fresh start. I suspect." He paused, studying her face. "We've both been told only part of the truth." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. He said this was punishment for not being the niece they wanted. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the land. "See those fields, Margaret? They stretch farther than you can see from here. Over 3,000 acres. My grandfather built this farm from nothing, and my father expanded it. I inherited it 5 years ago." Margaret's breath caught. "But my uncle's your uncle," Thomas interrupted gently. "Saw a man who lives simply and wears work clothes, and made assumptions. I let him. I've learned that people who judge a book by its cover often reveal more about themselves than they do about the book." He turned back to her. "I told him I needed a wife. That part was true, but not because I needed someone to cook and clean. I can do that myself. I wanted a partner, someone who understood that life is more than appearances, someone who'd been underestimated and knew what that felt like." Margaret didn't know what to say. In all her life, no one had spoken to her this way. "So here's what I propose," Thomas continued, settling back in his chair. "Stay here. No obligations, no expectations. You'll have your own room. Take time to see if you might want to build a life here, and if you don't, I'll make sure you have the means to go wherever you want to go. But you'll leave here with dignity and choices, not as someone's burden." The first month passed in a gentle rhythm. Thomas worked the fields but always made time to talk with Margaret over meals. He asked her opinions on things: where to plant the new apple trees, what color to paint the shutters, small things, but to Margaret, they were revolutionary. She discovered he read poetry in the evenings. She learned he'd been engaged once to a woman who'd left him when she realized his simple lifestyle was a choice, not a necessity. She wanted grand houses and city society, he explained without bitterness. "I wanted land I could walk on barefoot and coffee on the porch at sunrise." Margaret began to bloom in ways that had nothing to do with her appearance. She smiled more, her shoulders relaxed, She started baking again, something she loved but had stopped because her aunt complained about the cost of ingredients. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies, Thomas said, "You laugh differently now than when you arrived." "How so?" Margaret asked. "Like you mean it. Like you're not waiting for someone to tell you you're too loud." Margaret felt warmth spread through her chest. "My whole life, Thomas, I was too much. Too big. Too hungry. Too hopeful. Here, I'm just enough." "You were always enough," he said quietly. "You just needed to be somewhere that could see it." By autumn, something had shifted between them. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, it was as natural as the changing leaves. They'd started holding hands during their evening walks. Thomas had begun calling her Maggie, and she liked the way it sounded in his voice. One October morning, as they worked together in the kitchen making preserves from the last of the season's berries, Thomas stopped and looked at her. "Maggie, I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped. Old fears rising. Was this when everything changed? "I love you," he said simply. "Not because you stayed, not because you're kind, though you are, not even because you make the best blackberry pie in 3 counties. I love you because when I imagine my future, you're in every part of it, and it's a better future for having you in it." Margaret's hand stilled over the pot of berries. "Thomas, yeah, you don't have to say anything now," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know. No pressure, no expectations, just the truth." But Margaret was smiling through tears. "Let me finish. I was going to say, I love you too. I have for weeks now, maybe months. I just didn't dare believe it could be real." Their wedding was small, held on the farm with just a few neighbors and the local minister. Margaret wore a simple cream dress that Thomas said made her look like an angel. She felt beautiful, perhaps for the first time in her life, not because she changed on the outside, but because someone had finally seen who she truly was on the inside. Years later, as they sat on that same porch with grandchildren playing in the yard, Margaret would sometimes think about that dusty day when she'd arrived carrying a suitcase and a heart full of hurt. She'd been sent away as punishment and found instead the greatest gift of her life. Thomas, now silver-haired but still strong, squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking about, Maggie?" "About how sometimes," she said softly, "the worst thing that happens to us opens the door to the best thing. About how kindness can heal wounds we didn't even know we were carrying." He nodded, understanding as he always did, "and about how the richest life isn't measured in acres or dollars, but in moments like this one." "Exactly like this one," she agreed, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink over the land that had become her home, and the man who had become her heart. In the end, what her uncle had meant as punishment had been the beginning of everything good in her life, not because circumstances had changed her, but because she'd finally found someone who'd seen her worth all along.